Welcome to another installment of CineFix's Horror World Tour, Ghost Edition. Yes, this time we're checking in with the things in the night that go bumping into other things, depending on which philosophy you prescribe to. We're going to break down some ghost movies around the world that demonstrate the tropes we're so familiar with. And since ghosts are ethereal beings, some of these movies can and will float in and out of these topics. So, with that, I'm Francesca Rivera, and welcome to the CineFix World Tour of Ghosts! Starting with basically the history of cinema itself, Georges Méliès's two versions of The House of the Devil can be considered the first portrayals of ghosts in film. Granted, the films aren't so much a horror as it was a display of impressive visual effects for its time. The short films, however, do lay the groundwork for many ghost films to follow, which begs the question, what is a ghost? What do they look like? Can they talk? Just how picky are we going to get? Answer: not that picky at all. After all, this is a celebration of ghost stories from around the world. From the cartoonish to the human-like and beyond, there are so many cultural and religious interpretations of the afterlife and ghosts. For example, Christians believe ghosts are spirits who exist in an unofficial limbo while on their way to heaven or hell. Yet other cultures believe in another place entirely where spirits live in parallel to our world after they pass, coexisting and living among us. Many cultures have their own ways of honoring death so that loved ones can literally rest in peace, and that leads us to our first trope. Ghost stories are almost always about the idea of death. Ghosts are creatures that toe the line between science and religion and have a version in almost every culture. Whether the story is about someone's untimely, unexpected death or is a reaction to it, reflection of death is always a part of a ghost story. Many stories feature women in mourning, like in The Woman in Black or in any telling of La Llorona. In The Asphyx, Sir Cunningham's scientific pursuit of immortality is to avoid certain death by toying with human souls that ultimately ends in tragedy. In Ghost and a Ghost Story, widowed women have their late partners watching over them, but we also live within their grief. In the others, Grace's denial over losing her husband keeps her and her children in this huge house. Goodnight Mommy and A Tale of Two Sisters examine children's extreme reactions to grief and loss.
뭔가 잊고 싶은 게 있는데 깨끗하게 지워버리고 싶은 게 있는데 도저히 잊지도 못하고 지워지지도 않는 거 있지. 근데 그게 평생부터다냐? 유령처럼.
But for our pick of a ghost story where death and grief take center stage, we look to Australia's The Babadook. 7 years after losing her husband in a car accident on the way to give birth to her son, Amelia's depression hangs over her like a cloud. She herself is like a ghost, emotionally unavailable to her child, angry, closed off to love, and moving around like an empty shell of a woman. While many concerned loved ones encourage her to move on, the Babadook's introduction into her and her son's life is a reckoning. As a metaphor for depression, the Babadook pointedly warns her of the pain he'll cause if she continues to deny him. Like any mental illness, it's not that simple to repress it with medication. There needs to be actual work to overcome it. The Babadook torments Amelia by isolating her from others and threatening to take her son away from her. The battle with depression is constant, and the Babadook is a perfect metaphor for what it feels like for someone to cope with grief, recognize what's important, and to move forward on an indefinitely paused life. And yet, not all ghosts are here for a long time. Just a good time. So next, we look at the unfinished business of ghosts. Most times, though not all of the time, ghosts are products of unfinished business in this mortal realm. Whether they stay around because of a loved one or because they want to exact revenge on those who have wronged them, there is always a reason keeping them in this limbo. Of course, there are instances where they act as moral guides or metaphysical messengers for those still lost on Earth, but those types of movies aren't spooky, and that's what we're here for. No matter what though, ghosts are subjected to a limbo not of their own making. Yet 2004's Shudder from Thailand serves as an examination of who gets to decide how and when to move on. Haunted by the ghost of a wronged ex-girlfriend, Tun visits her mother and discovers that her body has been decaying in a bed upstairs. Hypothesizing that a proper burial will set his ex free of this limbo, Tun's temporary peace is the fault of his own mortal hubris. As the rest of the story unfolds, it's clear that moving on is on the spirit's terms. For Nata, this is revenge on her abusers. Tun already feels the literal weight of his guilt and the tension of his impending reckoning. Though when Nata is finally revealed to Tun and the audience, it only makes sense that she has been with him the whole time. She loved him, but he pushed her away. This way, she gets what she wants, but she doesn't disappear the way others do. She's choosing to stay, and that's more disturbing than anything else. Shudder effectively shows how both the living and the dead can view unfinished business, yet the power is never truly with anyone on this plane. Nata is a ghost who justly got her revenge and was in control of the terms of her stay. And much like people can be haunted, so can the object of this next topic. Houses. Usually one or two things are haunted by a ghost, a person or a place. Things are usually cursed, but that's a whole other video. I'll even go so far to say that most haunted house movies can be considered ghost movies. In movies like A Ghost Story or Beetlejuice, where a couple's future is cut short, but where the house still remains, the ghosts remain. In shows like Being Human and Netflix's hauntings of Hill House and Bly Manor, people who have died in the homes or on the properties are tied to the house. The Shining's Overlook Hotel becomes a menace to both Torrance men. When the location's architecture and idiosyncrasies are vital to the story, then the place becomes as much of a character as the human ones. But the house that we're moving into is the Stewart estate in English language The Others from Spain. The house that Grace Stewart and her two children live in is sprawling, cold, and lonely, but mainly in part of Grace's doing. While awaiting her husband's return from the long-over war, the house becomes the post that Grace cannot afford to leave. And with two children with rare skin disorders, the home becomes both a shield and a prison to the outside war and realities. When joined by a small crew of help with mysterious motives, the house starts to reveal itself to Grace and the children. Completely removed from the outside world and from time itself, Grace becomes disoriented, trying to figure out what sounds and sights are real. The house has some dark truths, some of which Grace uncovers, but the hard-hitting truth of her family's reality is a reveal that is both thrilling and reinforces the idea of a place ghosts can also call home. The Others is also a film wherein you just have to believe children sometimes, which leads us to our next topic. Children are ghost radars. Much like animals can feel natural disasters before they happen, children can and will always tell when there is a ghost around. From Tim Burton's Beetlejuice to both Casper movies to Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone and way more, children are often tools of the ghost genre simply because children have open imaginations and only deal in honesty. But focusing on the one child so important to this ghost genre, we must look to M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense. While these children in other movies have the luxury of seeing maybe just one or two specific ghosts or spirits, poor, sweet, scared Cole Sear frickin' sees all the dead people, all the time, even when he was a baby. As a child with an incredibly morbid ability, but without the tools to process this gift, that's where Bruce Willis's Dr. Malcolm Crowe comes in. As a benevolent psychiatrist, Crowe helps Cole figure out how to deal with the ghosts around him, and this normally one-sided relationship becomes a two-way street. The Sixth Sense demonstrates the sympathy that children have as Cole meets a parade of lost souls who need someone to help them pass on. His fear reminds us that children are still very vulnerable and susceptible to those who need help until taught otherwise. And in a way, The Sixth Sense somehow becomes a meta-genre guide to how children receive those ghosts who need their help. But sometimes even the cutest little kid can't do much, and ghosts just need a vessel to possess. Which brings us to our last topic. Possession! One of the cool yet freaky things ghosts can do is that they can possess inanimate objects or even people. This aspect of the trope leans more into the poltergeisty idea of a ghost, like in The Poltergeist, The Possession, The Exorcist, or Hereditary. Even weird alien-type spirits can possess, like in Possession or Ghostbusters. We see the humorous application of this in films like Beetlejuice and Casper. It can also be deadly, as in the case of Shudder, or straight up terrifying like in The Others. When we see things move without a visible force, we can assume that there is a ghost behind it. Though not every spirit can touch things right away, some have to learn it so that they can have very meaningful reunions with their loved ones. All in all, ghost control and manipulation over everything and anything is important to the genre, so we're looking to an early example of ghost possession through multiple thematic and practical forms in Mexico's Even the Wind is Afraid. Unlike modern ghost movies where we see some ghostly figure take over or control something, Andrea's presence in Even the Wind is Afraid is purely omniscient and atmospheric. We don't need to see Andrea or her flashbacks to her death to feel spooked out. Her unfortunate death already casts a long dark shadow over the movie and the school. From this established point, Andrea is able to actively create an atmosphere of remorse around the girls to possess their curiosity with the mystery of her death. And like cult leaders, a small group of curious, impressionable people is something that ghosts also need in order to be effective. When Andrea does want to make herself known, she shows up as the loud, dangerous winds at night and as a voice in Claudia's dreams, drawing her closer towards the tower. Andrea's subtle approach to possession guides Claudia and these other characters to where she wants them and sets the standard for what Claudia's eventual possession would look like. We don't need to see Andrea slip into Claudia's body and convulse to demonstrate her control over her new vessel. She gets in, gets out, and leaves Claudia basically unscathed, her real target handled and the campus free of her terror. As a ghost, Andrea doesn't abuse her ability just to be a jerk. She approaches it with utility, which is something the rest of these characters almost end up respecting by staying tight-lipped after the events of this film. So while not the most overt portrayal of possession, Even the Wind is Afraid demonstrates the various forms of possession that would define ghost abilities in movies for decades to come. We can never be truly sure who is with us at any moment, and for that we can all believe in ghosts to some degree. So those were some of our favorite ghost stories from around the world that helped define the ghost genre in film. Which ones did we miss? Let us know in the comments. And as always, subscribe to CineFix for more spooky movies from around the world. Woo! And for more of us on your TVs, tune in to channel 1351 on your Samsung Smart TVs every Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern and Pacific for CineFix on IGN1.